Introduce myself. So I'm Pascal Panosetti. I'm working for the Global Shelter Cluster. I'm in charge of technical coordination to support countries and also to moderate the technical community of practice. So today we will have the first webinar of one of the technical subcommittee of practice of the technical committee of practice. The barrier to success in international development and humanitarian construction project. So it's the first webinar of this technical thematic. Just as a small reminder housekeeping, so what is important, so we will try to, that we'll have some time to exchange, but you can add your question. The difference, instead of adding your question on a usual chat, you can see on the top, there is Q&A chat. So if you have any question, please add it on a Q&A, and some of the colleagues who are moderating this webinar will follow the question, and then we'll select some question for the presenter at the end. Then on the chat, you can use the chat to put any reflection, comments, any links you would like to share concerning the ongoing presentation. Thank you to keep your microphone off. The camera when you speak. It's always nice to see the people. And yeah, we don't have 90 minutes is quite fast. We have 4 presentation. So please try to be a bit concise to pass it quickly. This webinar is recorded to share with other members and will be published on the technical community of practice page. Just a short introduction about the technical COP. As you can see on this graphic, we have like 7 technical thematic, and as you can see in blue is the one of today. So we have merged the good construction practice and build back better also with permanent durable shelter and housing. And these 2 technical subcommittee of practice are very linked also to another community of practice, which is the recovery, because recovery is very linked to the best construction practice and build back better. So we have some coordination also with this community of practice. Let me just pass very quick the agenda. So we just do a short introduction. I will pass over to my colleague after Liz Palmer, who is, thank you to Liz, chairing temporarily this group to support. So she will just introduce the term of reference of this technical subcommittee of practice to explain you what is the objective. Then we have the presentation from Richard Devurst, who is also a member of the committee. He will present his PhD presentation on the barrier to success of international development construction project. So it's a big work that Richard has done. So it will be a snapshot of his thesis. Then you will have the link also to have more information, and maybe they will have another webinar only on his work. We will have also presentation from Sebastian Kaminski from Arup, so the private sector that we always welcome, working for a structural engineering company, Arup. So he will have a presentation on technical barrier to success. Then we jump to India with Sujoy, who will present some case study and recommender for equitable aid in post-conflict housing. So few case study of a project in India. Then we'll hope to have 25 minutes exchange. So we'll see with the time to answer your question and any suggestion, any discussion you would like to have. And then we'll just conclude with the next step and a conclusion. I'm passing over to Liz. So Liz, if you want to take the control, otherwise I can pass the slide for you. Over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Pascal. I can't actually see the take control button, so I guess I'll leave it up to you. So thanks, everyone. My name is Liz Palmer. I'm the Global Lead for Construction for Save the Children International, and also very happy to be chairing of this subgroup from the Community of Practice, the Technical Community of Practice. I think we probably jump straight to the next slide, if you can, please, Pascal. So basically the background of this group was that we had a number of working groups under the shelter cluster that had been merged. And it was determined that based on the aligned approaches and outcomes of those working groups, this was a convenient way to combine all of our ambitions, should I say, in terms of ensuring sort of technical aspects of the shelter and settlements programming with an emphasis on construction practices. So obviously all of our working groups and sub-working groups within, say, within the shelter cluster are open to all individuals. And I think there's one more point on this slide. Yes, and basically it's obviously we're very grateful for the active member participation. I'd like to take a moment to thank everybody who's presenting today, Richard, Sebastian, and Sujoy, that really fantastic support and engagement on this. And of course, all of the members are encouraged to contribute their knowledge and experience with regards to the work that they do and their in subject areas of expertise. Next slide, please. I think we've just had that. There we go, that's us. So they combined the permanent shelter and the construction good practice Build Back Better. We have a very impressive list of people on the committee, and I think we'll just jump straight to the next list. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the 3 working groups were combined to establish a critical role to promote the durable, resilient, safe, and cost-effective shelter solutions, contextually appropriate, and with a big push towards construction practices in the sense of looking at sustainability, durability, and resilience, but as well making sure that this is safe, the investment is accountable, and that the long-term maintenance is embedded in all of our programming. Next slide, please. With many of the community of practices, we have similar objectives within our terms of reference. The link is provided in the slides. The obvious ones being the sort of facilitated collaboration, knowledge sharing, networking, knowledge management. So putting together webinars like these and also establishing shared resources on the Shelter Cluster Library. We're trying to facilitate more shared learning, which is another opportunity here that we're doing today. And of course, identifying common challenges in terms of particularly construction quality, but looking at a lot of cross-cutting areas of inclusion, and of course, the implementation and effectiveness. And this, of course, underpins not only the mandate of the Global Shelter Cluster, but for many sectors, understanding construction quality and inclusion would be a priority. And then, of course, supporting validation and dissemination of good best practices within the sector and internationally through agencies and other platforms. Next slide, please. As with all of the COP, the participation and membership responsibilities are listed here. We obviously look to active participation and shared experience, engaging actively. We have a fairly active committee and co-chairs, of which we do host a number of meetings, and everybody takes a very collaborative role. And then, of course, you are welcome to join us. So these are the links and the instructions on how to join the technical COP. And through that process, you can engage with any of the sub-working groups that are interest to you. Next slide, please. We try to host regular meetings. We have monthly meetings within our co-chairs and the committee, quarterly meetings through the Shelter Cluster Technical COP. And of course, we do join and engage with some of the other sub-working groups under the Technical COP, some really incredible items on the agenda. I'm sure you've seen many of the introductions recently with many aligned ambitions within the other sub-working groups. Next slide, please. And I think we've had that again. So I think that might be the end of my introduction. Thank you very much. You're welcome to get in touch if you have any questions, either through the Shelter Cluster page or my email address has been provided there. And over to, I think we're just rotating the introduction. So in order to save time, I will be happy to hand you over to the capable hands of Richard Dewhurst, who is going to be presenting on his PhD. Fantastic piece of work that's taken a number of years to collect. It's come out of a collaboration through this interagency sphere and understanding the needs for improvements around construction and international development, a project that's very close to my heart. And of course, many of the people on this call would have been part of the steering committee and part of the stakeholder group that were involved in supporting this research. So over to you, Richard, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Liz. So yeah, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you are. So yeah, my name is Richard Dewhurst. I've got a civil engineering background, but today I'm going to be presenting findings of this PhD, which I've recently completed just a couple of months ago. So the scope of the research. So international development covers a really wide spectrum ranging from like small NGO-led projects up to large-scale kind of dams and huge infrastructure projects by development banks. And for my research, I've focused on the smaller scale construction projects because they face kind of unique challenges, but limited funding, weak institutional capacity, they lack expertise. And I'm also concentrating more at the development end of the humanitarian development spectrum. So rather than the immediate kind of life-saving projects at the humanitarian end, because in development projects, there's more opportunity for planning and consider things such as sustainability and building capacity, because you're not really focused on the kind of life-saving aspects. So yeah, the purpose of the research, as I say, is to identify the barriers to success of international development construction projects and propose solutions, practical solutions. To do this, I worked with two participant groups. So the first group consisted of implementing partners, and I needed to make sure that a wide range of skills were involved, not just engineers. So we had designers, consultants, contractors, procurement and logistics specialists, and independent consultants. And then a second group, which consists of funding or donor representatives to understand their perspectives as well. So in total, there's over 90 hours of clear format interviews where we explored the barriers across the project lifecycle. And from this, I developed an alternative model for the project lifecycle for international development construction, and validated the model by reviewing it with implementing and funders, so that their priorities, constraints, and feedback were all incorporated. So from the implementing finders, 4 main themes emerged. So firstly, the theme of abilities, which included 3 main types. So we had technical competencies like civil engineering knowledge, construction skills and construction knowledge covering more practical aspects, such as managing contracts and planning and construction activities, and project management skills. So this includes, managing stakeholders, managing risks, managing costs. The second constraint, limitations such as insufficient time, insufficient funding, data availability. And then we had contextual risks, which arise from the international nature, working internationally, working in lower middle income countries and resource scarce environments, and the typological challenges of international development projects themselves, such as the complex networks of stakeholders. The final theme was project effectiveness, which focuses on achieving sustainability, long-term impacts, and ensuring capacity built. And the striking pattern that emerged was that most barriers stem from the early front-end stages, which are rarely funded, and yet these critical decisions are made that shape the rest of the project. So this slide, it's just a kind of high level of which shows the connection between the life cycle stages and those themes. So you can see you've got the pre-project phase, pre-construction phase, construction phase, and post-construction phase down the left, and how they link to those themes. You can see that what's striking is the number of challenges identified by the respondents is largely associated with the early phases, the pre-project and pre-construction. And these are linked mostly to the abilities and constraints themes. So if we zoom in on the top part, it doesn't really show that well because it's a PowerPoint slide, but if you look at the pre-project phase and the pre-construction phase, you can see the strong links between these phases and the constraints theme and particularly the time and funding aspects of the constraints theme, and the gaps in technical expertise, construction expertise, and project management expertise on the abilities side of things. And then looking further down, you can see the construction phase, post-construction phase, much less so in terms of challenges, but you can still see, when you see the full diagram, you can see that there's links between construction expertise and the construction phase, which is to be expected. But you can also see that the sustainability aspect, there's a strong link between the post-construction phase, which you would expect as well, because that's when sustainability aspects emerge, or issues with sustainability emerge. But there are also links from the earlier phases to sustainability, highlighting that you need to consider these things right from the get-go, really. So why does the front end matter? So it's widely acknowledged that front end planning is the most critical phase for achieving project success, because decisions made here affect the entire remainder of the project. And this is where you define the scope, design, and essentially what you're going to build and how much for. And yet these decisions are often made in ID construction projects with limited input of experience and information. And a key issue is that construction projects, despite being high risk and high cost, are often treated as supporting elements of larger programmatic goals, rather than projects that need a focused investment. So this highlights the need to fundamentally rethink the approach and ensure that early investment in technical construction and project management expertise is there to set the project up for success. So the front end of ID or development construction projects is often handled by the new business or bid teams rather than by the delivery teams themselves, or anyone with any construction experience. So these bid teams work with very limited resources, limited time, in a competitive environment. And as a result, risks are often underestimated. There's little or no contingency planned in. And therefore the time allowances and budget estimates tend to be inaccurate. And the scope is generally loosely defined because the detailed design hasn't been developed yet. So the lack of technical and construction input, combined with the limited funding and time, means that the project begins on an overly optimistic and weak foundation, which can have implications throughout the project lifecycle. So as these early stages of the project lifecycle are typically carried out at a program level, rather than by the project delivery teams, this leads to conflation between the program lifecycle and the project lifecycle, because you've got different teams responsible for the proposal and the delivery phases. So you have this discontinuity between the early phases, the pre-project phase, and the rest of the lifecycle. And so you can have a situation where knowledge is lost in the handover between bid teams and the delivery, but it also, you have a lack of ownership and fragmentation, because there's no one at project level that's consistently involved through all phases of the life cycle. And to compound these challenges from the previous slide, implementing organizations are under pressure, a lot of pressure, to win funding in a very competitive environment. And this often leads to over-promising during the bidding phase as teams are trying to secure funding. So, but during delivery, however, these unrealistic promises create compressed timelines and overstretched resources, making it difficult to achieve project success. And the result is under-delivery and damage to the credibility of the implementer and the kind of sector more widely, really. So this highlights the importance of strengthening front-end planning to ensure realistic proposals are created and that accountability exists at during the bid stage. Another factor that contributes to the challenges is that in ID construction projects, the client is effectively a composite entity rather than a single individual or organization, because it's made up of three elements. So you've got the donor, the implementer, and the beneficiaries or end users. And each of these entities has different, often competing priorities and motivations. So for the implementer in particular, there's a tension because you're satisfying the donor-driven motivations, what the funder wants to get, and the beneficiary-driven motivations, so what the project is intended to achieve for the users, the end users. And this creates uncertainty about who the real client actually is, and also can influence decisions throughout the project lifecycle. And as alluded to earlier, so construction in development programs is often treated as the supporting function, and it's not, you know, it could be whether it's a part of an education, health or shelter program, it's not necessarily the primary objective, it's just the support. And as a result, it tends to be less visible and undervalued, even though it's very high risk and high cost. Program level evaluations, when they look back, they usually focus on the overall impact rather than the performance of individual projects, which means that we rarely understand why specific construction projects succeed or fail. And consequently, these challenges persist. And construction-specific lessons learned are seldom identified or applied, leading to systemic and persistent issues. And because construction plays this supporting role, both construction and construction project management functions are underrepresented in senior leadership roles. And as a result, high-level decisions are often made without sufficient technical or project management insight. So representation at leadership is essential to ensure that construction enters expertise inform strategic decisions and program management, helping to align the strategy and the practical realities and risks. So to address these challenges, I developed an alternative hybrid lifecycle approach. And this model was designed to enable rapid early stage information gathering to reduce uncertainty by integrating a wide range of stakeholders, including the end users, the technical experts, construction specialists, and project management. And it proposed a two-stage funding model where you have initial funding for the front end, for the detailed planning, feasibility and design, and then a second phase, the lion's share of the funding for the implementation once you've done this early phase properly and thoroughly. So this approach would encourage donors to recognize the early stage investment as an essential and legitimate project cost. It's part of the project, and it bridges the gap between the programmatic goals and the practical project delivery, and ultimately supports improved ID construction project outcomes. So when I spoke to the funders to understand their perspectives on project success and the acceptability of the alternative lifestyle approach, 5 themes emerged from here. So you had modality. So this covers who the type of actors involved, the type of funding, you know, is it a loan or a grant, and the type of project. Secondly, you had the abilities, which is similar to what we saw with implementers. So we're thinking technical, construction, project management expertise. The constraints, again, including the time, limited funding, limited capacity. The funder interests, so what are their motivations, what are their priorities, what are their strategic goals, and funding conditionality. So what are the restrictions and flexibility donors have on how their funds can be allocated, and the level of, you know, what's the level of unrestricted funding to be able to fund these early phases. And the striking observation from this phase was that just as with implementers, there's a lack of high-level construction and project management expertise. It's the same. This is true for the donors and implementers. So this creates a dynamic of mutual inexperience when it comes to construction. So critical decisions at the proposal stage are made between 2 parties, both of whom have limited technical expertise. So the implications of this research are: it provides greater clarity on the unique characteristics of ID construction projects, highlights the disconnect between program management and on-the-ground delivery. It recognizes the need for improved planning, coordination and capacity to achieve stronger outcomes. It reinforces that construction performance is a critical determinant of overall program success and not just a support function. And it provides a documented evidence for donors and implementers of the risks of current practices and the needs for change. So the recommendations has come under 3 broad headings. So under funding and capacity, so we need to develop new funding mechanisms. So the current model, the way that the current models don't really allow for any funding for the planning, and also the post-construction phases we need to develop mechanisms to enable that. We need to increase construction capacity through targeted training and organizational collaboration. On management and representation, we need to strengthen project management capacity, for example, through training or recruitment. We need to increase representation of construction professionals in senior leadership to ensure that technical insight informs the strategy and decision making. And finally, practical steps. We need to value and integrate practical construction expertise into project teams. So these are, the people who the skills that actually understand how you go about building stuff, not just this kind of professional consultant engineers. It's how long do these things take to build? What equipment do you need? What are the risks involved in actually constructing these things? We need to strengthen the project sponsor role. So then you have this continuity between the program and the project teams, and it also has oversight and alignment for the broader goals. And it helps to optimize the resource utilization because it identifies where the limited technical resources can have their greatest impact. So we're looking at the planning, design, and the critical areas of implementation. So yeah, I just managed to hopefully squeeze that in, the whole PhD into 20 minutes. But yeah, that's most of it. So I will now pass over to Seb, who's going to look at it more from specifically from a consulting engineer perspective.
Thank you very much, Richard. So hopefully that works now. So I'm going to be talking about a structural engineer's perspective on shelter design specifically, within the theme of barriers to success. So what are our technical barriers to success? So I'm going to start off talking about what are we doing well. I think we're doing a lot very well in the sector. I think the sector has matured and improved significantly over the past few decades. And then I'm going to discuss areas from which, in my perspective, we could improve upon. Although I'll be focusing on that, I just want to emphasize that I think we are doing a lot well technically. So the technical areas that I'm suggesting we need to improve upon, I don't want that to detract from the very good work that we are doing in parallel that we need to keep doing. So firstly, what are we doing well technically? From my perspective, the Build Back Safer key messages are very good. They're very simple to understand and without losing very much accuracy or nuance. So from a technical point of view, they're generally quite pretty correct. And the messaging generally also follows the state of the art. And as the state of the art changes, the state of the art in structural engineering and durability and seismic design, I have seen them move, and that's very good as well. Also, the sector has certainly now focuses a lot on self-build using local materials, community-driven, and construction systems that are easy to build by semi and unskilled labor. One can compare that maybe to 20, 30, 40 years ago when there was more interest in prefabricated solutions that now we realize generally aren't contextually as appropriate. So the sector has matured a lot in that way, and from a technical perspective, this certainly works a lot better, as well as obviously from the sociological perspective. In terms of where we could improve structurally with a focus on shelter, so there's 4 areas which I've identified that I think we can explore improving. Firstly, durability. Secondly, seismic behavior. Thirdly, community knowledge and vernacular architecture. And finally, alien materials and technologies. Starting off with durability. Now, since degradation often takes years to manifest itself, designers rarely see the impacts of design decisions that we make. So a shelter program will be implemented, and there might be a review after 1 or 2 years, but it might take 5 or 10 years to realize whether or not, from a durability perspective, the design was actually correct. And unfortunately, if you Google right now, beautiful timber or bamboo, or other bio-based projects, you tend to get very Instagrammable photos that give a false impression of good practice. And we know that while they look good on day one, after 5 or 10 years, those buildings suffer degradation, often have to be dismantled, but that's never reported. There are a lot of misconceptions regarding the durability of bio-based construction materials, even in apparently reliable literature, in particular for timber and bamboo, focusing on natural durability over reliance on treatment and exposure to driving rain. The photo in the middle is a photo I took of a bamboo house constructed after the 1999 coffee growing region earthquake in Colombia. And after just about 10 or 15 years, these permanent houses were already suffering significant degradation, and they didn't need to be, but the original design was flawed. We also see issues on low durability of reinforced concrete, again, maybe lower than needs to be. I know we can't always aim for permanent buildings that will last a long time, but often we can achieve better than we are. On the right-hand side, that's a photo from Odisha. That's a reinforced concrete column. After only 10 years, it's fully degraded. Again, it didn't need to do that. And the opportunity there is that simple design changes can often significantly improve the durability of a shelter at little to no cost. So appreciating that we don't have unlimited costs here. So I'm not talking about investing a lot more money into the design. I'm suggesting simple design changes at very little cost can significantly improve the durability. On the bottom left, that's a photo again from Colombia. And what they did there, they exposed the bamboo fully to the elements. The design life is limited to 10 to 15 years, but for free, we could have achieved 50 years just by having it fully protected. Seismic behavior. Now, since earthquakes are generally rare events, designers rarely see the impact of design decisions made, just like durability. And also, poor durability significantly reduces the seismic behavior. So we do see a lot of misconceptions regarding seismic behavior of bio-based construction materials, in particular timber and bamboo. We also see insufficient attention paid to non-structural masonry infill walls, which can pose a life safety risk, and they can interfere with the primary frame. So what's the opportunity? Again, simple design changes can significantly improve the seismic resilience of a shelter at little to no cost. Again, we're not aiming for code compliance. It'd be great to achieve that, but realistically, we know we can't. But what we can do is by good design, by putting reinforcement in the right areas, we can improve the resilience. And I often see many shelter designs where a lot of monies have been spent on the foundations and the ground floor slab, as examples, unnecessarily, and instead one can actually remove reinforcement from that, place it in the walls, and overall your seismic behavior is significantly improved at no additional cost. Community knowledge and vernacular architecture. So I'm sure we all know that traditional community resilience is good, and local communities have a lot of knowledge. But it's important to emphasize that traditional community resilience is good, primarily where disastrous events are constant and frequent. Communities generally have an excellent understanding of how to use familiar materials appropriately, but again, the key word is familiar. And vernacular architecture deals very well with frequent, but not necessarily rare events. And so one example there is that with CRS, we did a study in Odisha looking at the use of bamboo for shelter. And we interviewed the local community. We interviewed bamboo suppliers and bamboo carpenters. And we asked them how long bamboo would last in different conditions. And we already knew the answer to that. We wanted to understand people's perceptions. The community was spot on. This was a community with a very, very low income community, possibly with little formal education, but their understanding of durability was excellent. It was spot on. Unfortunately, when we moved to the suppliers and the carpenters, they were very optimistic with the durability. And the reason I mention that is because With familiar materials, communities know exactly how to use them. Unfortunately, when you look at suppliers and builders, they may be exaggerating the potential or the durability or the performance of certain materials. The key point here is that communities and vernacular architecture deals well with events and materials when they're frequent. However, where disasters are infrequent, then that vernacular architecture may not be able to deal with that. An example was Kashmir 2005. In that region, a lot of the housing is made of stone. Stone is locally available. The system there works very well for the cold climate. It uses local materials. It's easy to build. However, earthquakes there are quite rare, and therefore, unfortunately, those buildings performed very poorly to earthquakes. In addition, where other effects have disrupted a community, and the community may not be aware of those other hazards, that can be an issue. Rohingya refugee camps, for example, the Rohingya used to live more inland. They used to build a lot with timber, and they used to be, while they were exposed to typhoons, they weren't as exposed when they were forced out into Bangladesh, and they became much more vulnerable, and they had to use other materials such as bamboo. So their vulnerability increased as a result. Also, when new materials or technologies are brought in, this can cause problems. This is in Ecuador. This is a very light house. It's in a earthquake area. It's also in a flood-prone area. From the community's perspective, they're aware of both, but earthquakes are quite rare, whereas flooding probably occurs once a year. They've elevated the structure. They're aware that if there is an earthquake, firstly, it's quite light, and secondly, they want to focus on, from what their perspective is the highest hazard. Then reinforced concrete and masonry come along. They've now adapted that building using modern materials, but unfortunately, while they've created something that, from a flooding perspective, is works well from a seismic perspective, and they're probably not aware of this, the risk to life of this particular structure is significantly higher. So that's again where new materials or technologies are brought in. They can inadvertently increase the vulnerability of communities unless they properly understand the implications of those materials. So what are the opportunities? Firstly, we need to acknowledge that community knowledge is invaluable for local materials and frequent risks, but communities may not always be aware of the risks of rarer natural disasters, such as earthquakes. Also, if displaced to a new area, communities may not be aware of other hazards, and communities may not be aware of issues with alien technologies. And finally, that leads us on to alien materials and technologies. Now, the sector has moved really away from this. Which is very good, but unfortunately, there are still some media organizations and high-profile organizations which promote these, and these are what I've used the term alien materials and technologies. Anything from plastic bottle housing to super adobe. Now, from a cultural appropriateness point of view, I think we can all generally acknowledge that these tend to be very inappropriate, but purely also from a technical point of view, these tend to have a lot of issues, and they rarely perform as designers might claim, and they often have structural, seismic durability and fire issues. So really, we should be avoiding them. So just to summarize, suggestions from a structural engineer. Firstly, I'd recommend involving structural and seismic engineering early on in the design, especially if you're in a highly seismic area, and especially if you're looking at transitional or permanent housing. Obviously, emergency shelters are a little bit different. And then simple design changes can often significantly improve the seismic resilience and durability of a shelter at little to no cost. We should learn from vernacular architecture, but we should always assume that it automatically deals with rarer or changing hazards, and we should avoid alien materials and technology. Thank you. I'll now pass on to Sujoy, who will talk about a few case studies from India.
Sorry. Sorry for that. Good afternoon, good morning once again to everyone. The third civil engineer today's presentation, but I'm more of trying to become a sociologist. So I'll be talking about my experiences of, humanitarian development projects post disasters, and I'll be talking about 3 case studies which are from the eastern part of the Indian coastlines. The first one that I'm talking about is a project in Orissa, and this was in 1999, 2000, where we did a project which was larger, part of a larger program of CARE International, where we were doing houses. Now, super cyclone Orissa, it was one of the biggest cyclones in India, and at that point of time, how do we go about with a large construction project? But anyways, so the project obviously had some, key concerns. Like it said, okay, what does this project need to be? So it had to be cyclone, flood resilient, and it had to have a short construction time, cost rationalization, yes, equivalent to the government kind of thing, rates for people receiving government-provided low-income housing, and it should be able to employ local people and income generation for local people. So these were some of the stuff. And in terms of the project, the highlight of the project was that this was talking about technology. I mean, in 2000, we were talking about interlocking stabilized mud blocks. We were talking about prefabricated roofing channels, ferrocement roofing channels. And the whole idea was that we would provide a core house, and which would be prefabricated closer to the homes of the people that were going to be rebuilt. And this could be done at a short time, and the cost, etc., would work out. And while we were, giving them a very basic shelter, it was also assumed at that point of time that while these systems would be resilient, people would over time, build up on these structures and expand their living units around the house. And then to support all this, the project had also set up, production centers. These were called building material services banks, which were, set up during the project. Now, while this project went on to get some international awards and everything, which was fantastic, but let me take you through, these were some of the initial pictures. These were 99, 2002. The project took more time than we actually thought it would, because it was actually difficult for us to go down there and put up these systems for prefabricating. So we are using a hydroform machine, the South African machine. We were using, as you can see in the top left pictures, gantry systems for the roofing units and channels. So it was very complicated, but I think that was the challenge. So we went ahead, constructed these houses. It was tough, but I think going back to somewhere where Richard was talking about in his presentation about, the pre-planning stage. Now that's where the architects and engineers and the donors sat down, and they decided that this was something they wanted to do. A technology would be promoted, etc., etc. But getting it done on the ground was a completely different story. Anyway, personally, I retain my interest in these projects and have been visiting this project over a few years. The last visit, I did a visit once in 2009, then I did again in 2016. So this is 2016, and you can see some of the pictures. Interestingly, the interlocking blocks that we made at that time, they were still working very well. There were problems with the roofing systems, the ferro cement roofing channels. Some people could add on to it, but then it wasn't really a very complicated, a complete process kind of thing. Now, the second project is again another from Indian Sundarbans, which is the coastline in West Bengal, frequently, hit by cyclones and coastal flooding. So this was a project that was supported by Irish Aid, and we went ahead with a completely new set of ideas, and we said, yes, the core thing about these houses that they would have to be cyclone and flood resilient. And of course, the construction time should not be very long. Cost rationalization, yes, prevalent to government rates and local employment. But however, what we did in this was that we said, let's look at it at the traditional and vernacular and see how that works out. And here we had a reinforced, so we had a core house on a raised plinth and with brick masonry up to the sill level and traditional construction materials and vernacular architecture. We had a wattled and daub walls, gabled roofs, thatch and country tiles on wooden rafters. So just to give you some pictures, left-hand side is basically the framework of the construction and how these houses, were constructed. Different people added different parts to it. So it's a very traditional house which sits in that thing. Important point here was that while we were addressing the needs of the poorest of the poor, really, and now very early in the process, we got to understand that what kind of houses we gave those people was very important, because the slightly better off people had this feeling that, oh, you poor guys, you got, your house broke down because of the flood and the cyclone. Now this donor is coming to going to give you a big paka house, all that kind of thing. And the beneficiaries were also very unsure about what they were going to get. So there was tension that, the very poorest would suddenly have, fancy houses. And there was this possibility of discrimination. So, giving them this design through a process, a participatory discussion process, this design evolved where in the community said, no, this is perfect. We also have houses like this. So similarly, this was done in 2007, 2008. And I have been visiting these projects sometimes. And while they have survived, 6, 7, 8, in fact, there are 9 cyclones and floodings since then. These houses have, survived. They're doing well. People have been using these houses. People are building around these houses. And, things seem to be going well. Yes, there have been repairs, but these repairs, again, were done by the households themselves. Mostly, I think the point that Seb was also mentioning about bamboo and stuff like that. But those are things that they could manage on their own. And no, post-construction or, later on costs had to be supported to keep these structures okay. So that's one more project. And there's, again, in the Indian Sundarbans, this is more closer to the sea, where, again, cyclones and coastal flooding, is a big issue. And therein, again, with the support of Irish Aid, we said, let's look at the social infrastructure part, which was the, early childhood care education centers, primary schools, community shelters, community training centers, rural hospitals, etc. These kind of structures which were missing at that point, but whatever was available was inadequate. So we said, how can we look at it? So again, the core concept of, they had to be cyclone and flood resilient, construction time had to be less, cost rationalization and income generation. And the technology that we used in this was low carbon construction with local fabrics, rat trap bound masonry, T-beams, filler slabs, and using a vernacular uh, style, I would say, because we have mostly Hindus and Muslims around this, so we didn't want to use forms and shapes that would either be biased towards a particular community. So it had to be almost community neutral. So there was a very conscious decision. And a very important point was that because these are social infrastructures, they would have to have very, very little maintenance, or almost zero maintenance. So some pictures you can see, these are pictures that uh, this was this year, in fact, early last year, that I'd gone to visit one of these places. This is a rural, or as a community center where there are hospitals and nursing and farmers training and stuff like that. A lot of things happens out here, and doing pretty well. Other structures, community shelters, different designs, schools, Anganwadi centers. And these continue to be used and appreciated by people. And a very, thing that I enjoy most was that in that rural kind of a setting, each of these buildings have become a landmark kind of thing, next to that building, beautiful building and things like that. So just to summarize, on the 3 case studies, and it also reinforces what Richard and Seb were talking about. I took the 4 things, which the resilience part of it, system design, system performance, cost rationalization, and the core project assumptions. I mean, that's the donor's promise and the implementer's promise kind of thing. This is going to happen in the future kind of thing. How did it pan out? And importantly, I think the social acceptance. I mean, how much of these constructions that we do are socially acceptable. So on the first, all 3 did well, I think, in terms of, resilience. All 3 case studies, all the houses, buildings, etc., are still standing. They're performing well. In fact, the 3rd case study, where we used fabrics and rat trap bond masonry, filler slabs, etc., that seems to be doing very well, because these are public institutions, and they don't have any maintenance, and that seems to be doing well. People also have been using these systems and structures during events which continue to happen. In terms of system performance, if you're talking of the whole building system, I think the first one where we did with the interlocking mud blocks and cement roofing channels and stuff like that, I would say satisfactory, because the roofing system, had problems. Most homeowners over the years complained about roofing channels. And unfortunately, also the building material banks that were set up by the project, they closed down. So technology never took off, and making ferrocement channels, roofing channels by the thousands in a remote village somewhere and transporting them is anyway challenging. In terms of cost rationalization, while the first project in Orissa, the prefabricated, putting together kind of thing, initially when you did the, cost estimation, the BOQs, they worked out fine. But the cost of delivering that was very high. I mean, it required a lot of skills and engineers. I was the project manager and I had such a tough time out there getting things done anyways. So I would really call that, the cost part of it turned out to be different. In the next two projects, I would still say local materials, local structures. They're good. You didn't have to invest much in project management and cost. In the third case, yes, because we were looking at RATRA bonds, filler slabs, they required a lot of training to masons, etc. And these are high quality trainings that we have to provide. Again, in terms of the core assumptions, the first project in Orissa, although the houses still exist, but you know, I like the word Seb was using, alien. They stand out as alien. I mean, except for the color kind of thing, the rest is all alien. So somewhere, and people have not been able to build around that very easily. The other two case studies, Indian Sundarbans, these are, I would say, the assumptions have proved correct. People have been building up on them, living them, families have been expanding on them. So, and the public structures are doing well. I mean, hardly any maintenance for almost 17, 18 years, not even a coat of paint, but they're doing extremely well even in that corrosive environment. And the social acceptance, again, with the new technology, the prefabrication, the interlocking, etc., didn't work out. There wasn't much of social acceptance there. The other two, which was the traditional, construction projects, etc., they worked out very well. And as I said, for the third project where we did the social infrastructures, these buildings, small little buildings in villages have become landmarks. So near that, building, near that building kind of thing. So this is a brief about, my case studies that I've been presenting. So while the concept of Build Back Better has been there, and I think we have evolved in our understanding of resilience as we've been doing well, there is this element of social acceptance, I think, that needs to be factored in very, very carefully at the beginning of the project, because one can look at it at a technology promotion. I want to promote a particular technology, but end of the day, perhaps that's not the right decision. So that's about all from me. Thank you. Right. So I can stop sharing and pass it over to yes.
Yes, thank you very much, Sujoy, Sebastian, and Richard for this presentation. I think we can discuss a lot of technical parts. So we will pass to the plenary discussion. So thank you everybody also for the time. We are on time, so we still have 25 minutes for plenary discussion, question and answer. I will just check the question on the chat, and I can pass also over the word to the person who has the question. Maybe Alex Miller, if you are here, you have a question to Richard. So if you would like to ask him directly, over to you. You can open your mic and your camera.
Okay, I'll try to do the camera, but the connection is a bit poor.
Yeah,
but,
no, okay. If you have problem connection, yeah, over to you.
Well, thank you, Richard, for your work. It's very important, and I wish it had been shared. Your work has been long overdue for sure. One question I had for the donor's perspective in terms of, as you said, having agencies with a lack of technical knowledge in the senior level, how important and how do you see the role of third-party monitors being useful in ensuring, from a non-biased, non-conflict interest perspective, that the work is done well, safely, and on time? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I mean, so you're talking really about, I guess, site supervision, overseeing quality and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, from a start to finish, making sure
it's safe, it's
Yeah.
ethically right, it's no corruption,
Yeah.
everything.
So yeah, I see it as very incredibly important. You know, even, you know, let's say the implementing partner, even if they have good standards of construction knowledge, they will still need somebody present on site to control the quality, control the safety. I mean, in commercial construction, you'd never have a situation where a contractor was just left to deliver a project without any oversight at all. You know, you have to have checks and balances in place. So, you know, for a donor not to make sure that their implementing partner has made allowances for supervision is kind of foolhardy, or it's a false economy, really. And it's something that, you know, but from both perspectives, the implementer and the donor, they should both be in agreement that this isn't a kind of nice to have. This is like part of running a construction project. So I see it's not an optional thing, I don't think, and trying to cut the amount of resource or funding that you allow for that kind of role is not, it's not going to end. You're not saving money in the long term, as far as I see it. You know, that money you spend on having some supervision, having some oversight, it's only going to, it's otherwise, you know, it wouldn't be done in a commercial environment if it didn't pay dividends, right? Yeah. So Liz, I see you want to come in on that.
Yes, just briefly. Thanks so much, Alex. It's a really interesting question, and I think coming from a donor, or USAID, a really important one. I'd love it if we could all get together one day and have a talk about how things look from each other's side of the fence. Because obviously, you know, we have these challenges generally where people say, oh, there isn't enough funding, there isn't this, there isn't that. And so we have that component. But obviously, when we speak to various different individuals within a donor agency, they are 100% committed to ensuring supervision and oversight. It just seems like there's a massive disconnect in a lot of the expectations. Some of the donors are obviously much more kind of conditionality based, and so they're a lot more stringent around the kind of monitoring that needs to be done. And some of them, including USAID, were incredibly what's not that the right word? Shall I say much more strategic in terms of the expectations and outputs than other donors. So you have obviously what you call good donors who are willing to ensure that there's a robust framework for monitoring, and then bad or non-informed donors who don't have any framework for monitoring and reporting. And I think in many cases, a lot of us with our internal funding mechanisms and humanitarian funding mechanisms act like a bad donor, in the sense that we have our humanitarian funds, and if we aren't applying a robust and strict kind of donor-led approach to conditions and reporting and monitoring, you're going to end up with those gaps. So, I mean, you can almost look at this from an individual case-by-case basis. I'd love the next project to be an overview of all of the different donors and all of their different conditions around implementation and how they actually fund that, because we see this a lot where there are lots of expectations, particularly around the environmental impact associated with our projects now. And yet very few donors actually have an environmental impact framework that we're supposed to be operating against. So Save the Children has developed their own on the basis that we keep getting asked to do environmental impact assessments, but no donors except USAID actually were very strict on this, that they actually had a set of conditions under which we would operate, and they had a framework and monitoring tools, and all of those aspects of the work were stipulated by the donor. So there's no wiggle room for lack of understanding or just ignorance or laziness or non-compliance. And that's where we really need to see a robust framework. But you mentioned about the third-party monitors, and I can say personally from experience that there is a challenge with regards to third-party monitors in terms of their quality and understanding, where we've had situations where third-party monitors have come in. They have either not understood the project or been completely inexperienced and completely misunderstood the project and the gaps, reported badly, and in our case, it led to a catastrophic loss of funding. This was before the aid cuts. And it was down to a bad report by a badly informed and unexperienced engineer who went to a project and wrote badly about one of our projects. It was since clarified and we cleared everything up, but it was too late to save the project. The other thing that we have a challenge with is the misunderstanding around third-party monitors and their scope of work. So in many cases, people think, or donors think, we've hired a third-party monitor, they're going to be doing site supervision, reporting, contractor invoice verification, quality monitoring, etc., safeguarding, all the aspects. But in actual fact, all they're ticking off is project outcomes, so that they're not necessarily taking on board the construction management at all. And if we're not, all of us, clear about what that is, you're going to end up with these massive gaps. Also, organizational components. Save the Children has a very robust framework. It was established as the Construction Good Practice Standards, which is how one of the working groups was originally started. And within that framework, we internally try really hard to hope that our country officers have sufficient capacity, understanding, and compliance to follow the basic minimum professional criteria around all aspects of construction within the program lifecycle. Where that starts sliding apart is where we have match funding, where we work with partners. And if we don't have donors who are willing to accept and understand the requirements around just basic planning, allowing for the sufficient amount of time, or if they pull the funding that we need to change our outcomes. We can't build 10 schools if we're not getting the money for 10 schools. And I'm talking from experience. I could sit here for hours and tell you every single thing that's gone wrong. But ultimately, it is that disconnect that comes from the lack of information at all levels of the party. And it comes back to Richard's PhD, which is not necessarily that the right people are in the conversation at the beginning, at the inception of the project. So you can have generalists or new business development, fundraisers, advocacy people, or even a technical specialist in education writing a proposal with a donor, and they have absolutely no idea how much the school's going to cost and how long it's going to take to build, and that you can't build in South Sudan during the rainy season, so we're going to need a much longer time period, and we're going to need 12 months retention on that because of the construction contracts. So all of these components align to in the end come up with exactly as Richard's PhD has found, that we just don't have the right people involved in the conversation early enough to have a tangible impact on ensuring project success at the end. And I'm just so grateful for this research and the recommendations that have come from it, because it says what we collectively on this call probably all know, that we have a very weak framework around this aspect of our work, and it is one of the most high risk activities that we do. And certainly in Save the Children, it is a huge dollar value of our portfolio. We work in over 100 countries, and we probably do construction in more than 70% of those countries. So we are constantly striving to achieve the right approach at all levels of program management. But thank you. I can see there's a lot of other questions, so I'll drop it there.
Yeah, I would like also to add, I'm totally agree with all this discussion, because we can see in the private sector, when you work in a private sector, the time to manage a proper construction project. We speak about years, 1, 2 years, 3 years. And that, I think, the pressure that any shelter person, any organization had, as it was said, okay, there is competition between the organization to have the contract, and then the resource and the time you need for planning, sometimes it's 6 months, maybe you will need to plan for do a good construction project. I'm speaking on a private sector way, because I worked 10 years in construction in Switzerland. And so that's the pressure, the funding, the time to have the proper resource and all the expert in all stage of the construction management project. So I think that's a big challenge, and as said also by Liz, is like we are always on pressure to do fast, and they think about the result, but to reach a good result in construction, you need time. That was just a small comment on my part. Thank you very much, Richard and Alex. Let's pass another question to another presenter, maybe to Sebastian. Let me just check the question. There was already one question from Alex Miller. There was also an exchange on, maybe we can see this part, Alex, about technology. I can show this slide. There was also some comment from me. Like this technique, this innovative technique, like the super adobe. We know it has been developed in Iraq for the BAM earthquake by this Iranian architects. Me have been trained, I'm not a super expert, I know. And as you said, Sebastian, this one is to build a dome, so we need also to it should be adapted culturally. And so it's not maybe the shape, and there is a lot of details, that you need to take into account, like protection of the plastic, like say the mamune. So I don't know. I think Charles want to say something also on that. So like all this technology is nice. I think I believe on Earth bag. I'm also an ecological constructor, but it's true. To build a big scales, a project, then it will take time also, and you need to do the training and, really all the details of the conception of this innovative technique. So that for sure, that would be a challenge. Over to you, Charles.
Merci, Pascal. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Charles Parrock here, Centre for Development and Emergency Practice, Oxford Brookes University. Thanks to Seb for raising an issue which I think is very relevant to us, which is small changes, small locally led, potentially, changes which can have significant improvements in durability or seismic performance, for example. And I thought this is something which is very well worth exploring in more depth. And we have been working on this also. We call it incremental innovation in Gaza, with the technical working group of the shelter cluster in Gaza, where there is just such a need for massive shelter, as you all know, but maximizing covered space with minimal materials. And what we've been, and the Israeli authorities won't let large section timber into the country, so all we could get approved was 25 by 50 timbers. And so alongside CRS, there was a technique that was evolved to maximize the use of those materials to get covered space, and also with certain innovations in cross bracing, and using a tarpaulin as cross bracing with T-section timber, so that you make a deeper section of timber. So that I think those things are really, and we tested this out in the country, and there were some more innovations that came through from the ground as well. So I just thought it was something that is well worth looking at for us in terms of looking for innovation, and also wondered if there were other people who have similar experiences of this, and I would be very interested in hearing about those. Thank you. Over.
Can I jump in, Pascal, in relation to the Adobe
for sure.
work? So I think the Super Adobe is quite an interesting system, and after probably worth highlighting an example, but I'll anonymize it. After one earthquake in the past 15 years, quite a lot of Super Adobe was proposed, and I was contacted about the seismic performance of that. And when I looked at it, I had a lot of concerns. And there was a website promoting it, which was full of mistakes, but big technical mistakes. And the reason I say this is because, one, we just need to be aware that, unfortunately, with the best of intentions, we do see quite a lot of misinformation. And that's not to say that Super Adobe can't be made to make it seismically resistant. I'm not saying that, but with that particular version, that I did have a lot of concerns. And the point being that don't always necessarily trust what's on the internet. Always review independently, and make sure you're speaking to a specialist in that particular field, if it's durability, if it's fire, if it's seismic, or anything else.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sebastian. And yeah, you totally agree. And is also, the checking of our structural engineers and small details on that. And I know we speak about SuperAtob, which is the tube. There is also Earth bag, but I think is the same. And I can understand some doubt on the conception. I don't know if someone has some example to share with Charles about his last question about innovative. Charlie, was that? Then I will pass over to you, Matt, and then I will pass a question to Sujoy. Charles, it was like you were interested to have some some experience from the community about.
Yeah, for sure,
innovative.
absolutely. But
Yeah.
I mean, Pascal, maybe there's an opportunity to reach out to the community and have an item in this in one of the meetings. That would be great. Thank you. Over.
Yes, exactly. That is a webinar. That's a bit the idea. Maybe it will be to organize some meeting. Maybe less. Sub-subject that we have really time to discuss between the member. Passing over to you, Mathieu. You have the hands up.
Yes, thank you, Pascal. Just quickly, I want to go back to the barrier of success topic because I think I wanted to mention something and bounce back on what you were saying, Pascal, in linked with the private sector, and I think this is maybe the key difference between humanitarians and the private sector building whatever project. And from my experience working for the private sector, working also for the humanitarian sector, I feel like in the private sector you have this accountability, you have this deadline and specific goals where if you don't respect your deadline, you're losing money and you put at risk your team, your own position, but also the whole company, which is quite different in the humanitarian context when you implement shelter project. And I think this barrier and we mentioned supervision also component of a project is different when we talked about the humanitarian context and also the private sector context, but also of the type of project and infrastructure we are building. When I worked with the private sector, there was definitely minimum of 3 parties involved: the client, usually the government, engineer, consultant, and also, of course, the donor. All of them were involved in the project. The engineer is in charge of the supervision, the quality, the contract management, administration. But also, I mean, the donor, depending on the donor, is also involved in the supervision of both the contractor and the consultant. The contractor, which I forgot. So when it comes to the NGOs or agency or in the humanitarian sector, what's missing, and that's maybe also a key issue, is competences and capacities, which we definitely have in the private sector. But I've seen a lot of organizations without engineers or proper project manager or program manager implementing actually shelter project or other type of infrastructure project, and pretending that they can contact a donor and access to funds and big envelope and implement shelter project, or again, other infrastructure project. And you end up with a team without the proper capacity, construction, engineering capacity to implement that project. And the quality at the end is very poor. And I think that's one of also the key issue in this sector. Over.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mathieu, for this remark. I'm also agree is why we are trying more and more to involve the private sector. Maybe for the size of engineering, me, I'm architect, for instance. I'm also a shelter program manager. But for sure, I'm not an engineer. And okay, you hire the local engineers also. So you will have the engineers. So I can understand that. Mainly is what I notice in a humanitarian world. You will find more architects than engineers already. There is some engineers are also doing humanitarian work for NGOs, but it's less than architects. But yeah, it's all about this question about quality. I don't know if Sebastian, you want to say some things about that? Or...
No, I think you covered it well.
Yeah. I mean, it's general is why we're trying really to improve the way to work between the provider. Okay, it's 2:22. I would like also to have a question for just to inform. I have collected all the questions, so we try to keep all the questions and maybe see with the presenters if they can answer after, and then we can add on a meeting notes. Maybe Sujoy, I don't see if there is one question for you. I don't know if someone has a question to Sujoy concerning the case study. Let me just check on the chat. There's other question here. So I will ask you one question. Sujoy, like what practical recommendation will you give to agency designing post-disaster reconstruction programs in similar coastal or flood-prone areas?
Right. I think, you know, if you're building a house or let's take a house for a person. I think, you know, we need to look at how that family uses the space. You know, people just don't need to sit inside a house. They need, in rural villages, it's about storing food stuff. It's about other essentials. It's even livestock like goats and other things, you know. So, and they don't have shelves and wardrobes and stuff like that. So, you know, where do they put their things? How do they use those things? Can they drive a nail into the wall kind of thing? Or, you know, make a small bracket or put in a shelf kind of thing. And I think sometimes, you know, if you're looking at it from outside or the shell part of it, you miss the inside in the sense that it's a living space and it has to accommodate the people who would be using that. So I think a very good understanding of, I'll take a case, for example. In 2000, of course, we were not talking about sanitation. But just imagine there's a cyclone, there's a flood around you, and you need to go for a pee at least. I mean, you know, where do you go? So women, so, you know, what we did in our houses in the Sundarbans is there was that one corner where they could at least go to pee. It would flow out, but that's a shelter privacy kind of thing, even in a situation when an event is happening. So, and I think that would be my recommendation is that think of the people who are going to use this, you know, structure that we are constructing for them. I think if it's schools, why it should be more open and more airy and more, you know, lively kind of thing. Space are often used for different, you know, sometimes it could be a meeting out there, more people getting in there. So how do you do that? So essentially, as I said, yes, the structural part is important. And I think there's a lot of things we already know about resilience, whether it is cyclone, storms, earthquake, etc. But to make those actually livable and useful for the people, I think it's important to understand how they live in, you know, in their context, kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
Keep it at that. Okay.
Thank you very much, Sujoy. I think the word I can summarize, like we need to take, you know, we need to listen to people we help also and understand the needs of the women, of the children, and you know, the culturally appropriateness also, and how you will build a shelter. As you say, latrine, it depends the countries also, it depends also the culture. Sometimes it's separated, it is not in a house, you know, so always to take that into account. And yeah, but trying always is why I'm always saying there is like wash and shelter. We need always to work with, you know, they can have a wash without shelter, but they cannot have shelter without wash. We need to think about the hygiene, the water, the sanitation. Thank you very much, Sujoy. So we have 3 minutes left. So I will, as I said before, so we will keep correct the question and try to go back. So I will just go to the next steps. What I can say, as you understood, Lisa has presented how we are working, the technical subcommittee of practice. So it depends on the members. So maybe we will trying to do every 3 months, every 4 months a webinar. As I have suggested before, it can be also a meeting or there is more discussion on specific topics that you would like to discuss, like the one of Charles Parak have explained. It can be one meeting just discussing on that, or at least 30 minutes, like covering 1 or 2 subjects ready for exchange between the members. So we always, you are welcome if you would like to present also something, some thematics. We have 3 thematics, good construction practice, build back better. So we haven't touched build back better is always including in a good construction practice, but we could have also some specific presentation on that. As it was said, that's the goal also of a group, is like to collect technical resources. So if you have from your agency, your company, any document very relevant, you can share to us. And with the group, we will evaluate and we can publish on the technical toolkit. I just write my email. I'm not the chair of this group, but you can pass through me and then I will communicate with the other group. I'm just sharing the important links. We will publish this presentation, so you will have all the links to the technical toolkit, community of practice and technical toolkits. And sorry, the total damage assessment is a mistake. So we will also share the term of reference. It will be published after this webinar on the platform. I will go quick on that. So it's very important for us. If you would like, we have a distribution list, but the best way for the Global Shelter Cluster is if you create an account, you can create an account with your personal email. You go on the website, and then you can follow the technical community of practice. If you follow it, you will receive automatically when we create a news, announcing a webinar or something, documents published, you will receive automatically in your email. So we really recommend you to register. That just to give you an example, we have the technical COP page. This one is for damage assessment, but you can see on the left, there is all the sub-technical community of practice, including this one. So this one is ready to communicate, is where we publish all the webinar recording, the presentation, webinar notes, etc. So it's ready for the communication. And then we have the technical toolkit. Again, that's the example for the damage assessment. We will publish resources here. So it can be tools, it can be various document resources that it can support anybody for your response. So thank you very much. Maybe just to conclude, we can say this webinar is explore the barrier and enablers for success in humanitarian construction and shelter programming. That's the objective of this group. Richard emphasizes the importance of early technical planning, coordination, investment in local capacity, and many other challenges. We remind you, if you want more interest, to check the thesis of Richard. Sebastian highlights the value of context-appropriate, low-cost technical improvement, blending engineering expertise with local building knowledge. And Sujay shared lessons from post-disaster housing in India, underscoring equity, participation, and community-driven design. I hope it was interesting for you. I would like to thank again all the presenters and all the technical subcommittee committee for their work. I can remind it's a voluntary base, so all the people who are participating in the community are really dedicating some time on the side of their professional time. So thank you again very much. If anybody is also interested to join the group, now we have merged the 3 thematics, but maybe we will split later if there is more interest. So anybody interested to join the committee, please just send me an email and then I will pass over to the chair. So with this word, thank you very much, and we will keep you informed for the next webinar and next meeting. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Good night or good morning. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.